The zechus of refuah shlema for their niece, Chava Tzipporah, Bas Chaya Malka. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah she together with Kol Chole Yisroel will have a complete and enduring refuah. We also dedicate our learning this morning in the zechus of refuah shlema for a young man in Florida who's in critical condition, Daniel Asher ben Esther Risha. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, he together with Kol Chole Yisroel will have a complete and enduring refuah. We'll say with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Tzadik Dalid 94, and we are picking up Emir Hashem on Tzadik Gimel Amud Beis 93b, and we left off 5 lines up from the bottom, second to last word on the line. Says the Gemara, the Ikeda Amr. So just to remind us a little bit of the context, we were speaking about over here. Or I should say we began the sugi yesterday about whether or not an Eid Echad is believed when it comes to a situation of Yevamos. In other words, what we have ascertained over the course of the last couple of days, or what we've been focusing on, is the believability or reliability of an Eid Echad to testify that a woman's husband died, so as to allow her to go ahead and remarry. Again, we had a whole machlokes about what the nature, why do we believe in Eid Echad? Okay, we've gone through all the different possibilities. Mishum Miguna, is it Hora'as Bezdin? Is it just a license for her? The Gemara then, towards the end of yesterday's daf, asked kind of a variation. Isn't Eid Echad believed to say that ultimately the brother-in-law died in order to allow a woman to now marry anyone? So in other words, to illustrate, Rachel is married to Ruvain. Ruvain died. There's no, everybody knows he died. He died at home. Everyone saw him die. He died without children. Now what happens? Ruvain has a surviving brother, Shimon. So now Rachel has a mitzvah, or Shimon has a mitzvah of Yibum with Rachel. In this case, the shaila is an Eid Echad believed to say that the Yavam died. What's the impact of saying that the Yavam died? Now she's permitted to marry whoever she wants. That's the question. So we had one part of this discussion last night. Now the Gemara said, the Igad Amar. Others say. So just beforehand, the Gemara said, of course. In other words, that Allah Lamaisa, the same way that you're going ahead and believing in Eid Echad to say that a husband died, which remember is an Isser Kares. What do I mean Isser Kares? In other words, if the Eid Echad is wrong, and a husband is alive, so based on the testimony of then that's adultery. Adultery carries with it a penalty of Kares. So if you're going to believe the Eid Echad to say that the husband died and allow the wife to just marry another man, then of course you should believe the Eid Echad to say that what? The Yavam has passed away, because remember again, a woman marrying someone other than her Yavam, what's the nature of that prohibition? It's a lav. Okay, there's a whole machlokes even if marriage works in that case, but at most it's a lav. So now alternate version, the Igad Amr, others explain, ha loti bailach. The truth is, you don't even have to have a question about whether or not an Eid Echad is believed by the Yavam. Of course, an Eid Echad is believed to testify that the Yavam passed away. How so? Da'afilu ihi nami mehemna. Because interestingly enough, the wife herself is believed, or the woman herself is believed in this particular type of context, that to Allah Lamaisa say that her Yavam passed away. This nan, ha'isha sha'amra meis ba'ali, tinase Ha'isha sha'amra meis ba'ali, tinase meis ba'ali, tisyabim. So I will say ultimately again, so we're going to see a little bit later on, what is quoted from the Mishnah Kuf Yud Daled, right? It's a lot later on, a few weeks from now, we'll discuss this particular situation where halacha l'maisa, a woman herself is believed to say, my husband died, or ultimately again, a woman herself is believed to say that now her husband died, she's subject to Yibum. So I will say, so of course, if the woman herself is believed to testify about the death of her husband, which would allow her to marry someone else, or for that matter, if the woman herself was believed to say that halacha l'maisa, her husband died, now she's going to perform yibum based on that, if she's believed, then of course an Eid Echad is believed. So I will say, what's the shaila? Kiti barilacha, lemishri yevama la'alma. See, I will say, the shaila is like this. The shaila is, is the Eid Echad believed to allow Rachel to go ahead and marry into the general population? Look at Rashi. Yevamos Alma. Rashi says, Eid Echad, mitira l'shok, she'omer la meis yivimech, o meis ba'alech va'achar kach meis b'neich. So I'll say, what's the shaila? So the shaila is not in terms of whether or not an Eid Echad is believed to say that a husband died, or for that matter, whether or not the Eid Echad is believed to say that now the woman is subject to yibum. Those are both obvious, because if the woman herself is believed in those situations, certainly an Eid Echad is believed in those situations. So where does the shaila come up? The shaila comes up, Rabbi say, in a situation of, isn't Eid Echad, or kind of I got jumped out a little bit, isn't Eid Echad believed to say that the brother-in-law died? So now let's say we know that a woman is subject to yibum. Is the Eid Echad believed to say the brother-in-law has died, and now halacha l'maisa, she, we'll call her Rachel, is permitted to marry into the general pool, the general population. That's what Rashi says. Last Rashi on the daf, Yevamos Alma, Eid Echad matira l'shuk, she'omer la meis yivimech. The Eid Echad in this case is allowing her to marry into the general marriage pool, because the Eid Echad is testifying and he's saying, your Yavam, your brother-in-law has passed away. What's the halacha in that situation? To which the Gemara says, my time of the Eid Echad. What's the reason in general why we believe in Eid Echad? Mishum demilsa da'avidi ligluye lo meshaker. So I'll say this goes back to yesterday's daf. So do we say in general, the reason we believe in Eid Echad is why? Because halacha l'maisa we assume that people don't lie about pieces of information that will become revealed, that will come to light. People only lie about things that they can get away with. So since in this situation, if the Eid Echad shows up and tells Rachel that your brother-in-law Shimon passed away, and now you're permitted to go ahead and marry into the general marriage pool, someone's not going to lie about that. It doesn't make sense, because lying that someone is dead is something, and if they're not, is something that will become found out, right? So therefore, again, an Eid Echad, so that's why I both said, just like an Eid Echad is believed to tell a woman, your husband is dead, because Lamaisa, we assume he's not going to lie about something that will ultimately come to light, so too he's believed to say to Rachel, your brother-in-law, Shimon, has passed away, and therefore you're permitted to marry into the general population. O Dilma, the other possibility is, the other possibility, no, I'll say, is why? Can we keep going back to this same tension? That why do we believe in Eid Echad? I'll say it's not really because we believe in Eid Echad, but we do something fascinating. I mean, we do, but here's what we do. Essentially, the way it works in Eidos is that the responsibility of fact-checking and the responsibility of establishing truth rests upon the Eidim. In a general case of two Eidim, perhaps by Eid Echad, what we do is we shift that onus from the Eidim to who? To who? To the woman. To the woman. And to say, an Eid Echad is enough for us to say there's some level of credibility, but it's not enough to really establish the complete credibility or veracity of this claim. Instead, what we'll do is we'll shift that onus to you, assuming that you, woman, are going to do the fact-checking, that you are going to go and really do the investigation, because remember, you have everything to lose if you're wrong. So perhaps that's why we go out and we believe Eid Echad. To which the Gemara says, O Dilma, last line, Tzadikim Lo Beis, O Dilma, time of the Eid Echad, Mishum Di'ihi Daiko Min Sabah, because normally we assume that, right, we believe in Eid Echad because she's going to investigate before she gets married. Listen to this. Vaha Lo Daiko Min Sabah. But in a case where the Eid Echad comes along, and what? Tells her that Shimon, her brother-in-law, is dead, so now she has the ability to marry anyone she wants. She's not going to investigate. Why? Deminsahu. Because she never liked the guy to begin with, right? So first of all, she is so happy that someone, I mean, of course, not totally happy. She's sad that he's dead, but happy that she doesn't have to marry him, right? So halacha l'maisa, maybe again, she's relieved and happy. She never liked him, and therefore she's happy that he's dead, and she's going to be more than happy to what? Take the Eid Echad's word at face value without any further level of due diligence. So I will say that's the tension. That's the tension over here. So I will say, so again, you just have two versions. In version number one, kind of the conclusion of the Gemara was no, we should believe in Eid Echad even when he testifies to a woman that her Yevamos passed away. In version two, perhaps we shouldn't, right? So I will say, and it's just the opposite. In version one, remember from yesterday's daf, we said that that perhaps we shouldn't believe the Eid Echad because maybe we should believe the Eid Echad because she might have an affinity towards the Yavam. In version 2, we shouldn't believe the Eid Echad because maybe she has a revulsion from the Yavam. Okay, so top of Tzadik Dalet. I'm going to Rav Sheshes. So we're not finished. So remember, let's go with what we've established. What have we established? An Eid Echad is believed when? Right? Say husband is dead. To say the husband is dead. The Gemara is dealing with a very specific question now, which is an Eid Echad believed to say, now we know the husband is dead, right? So this is a situation where we know that a woman is in a Yibum situation. She has fallen to Yibum to her brother-in-law. Is an Eid Echad believed to say that the brother-in-law is dead so as to allow her to marry into the general marriage pool? That's the question in front of us now. So let's analyze. Amar Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes said, Tinisua. The truth is, we answered this question from our Mishnah. So I'll say, remember again, we saw this in the Mishnah. How? Amrullah. If a witness came along and said to her, Meis ba'alech v'achar meis b'neich. Remember again, I will say this was the case in the Mishnah, where a woman's husband and son went overseas together. She stayed home. And now what happens? Witness will see, came and testified, and they told her, unfortunately, your husband and your son both passed away. Then I will say, after finding out that piece of information, what's the next most critical piece of information? What order? What order did they pass away in? So if they tell her, Meis ba'alech v'achar kach meis b'neich. So if they told her, listen, your husband died first and then your son, then what's the halacha? Then I will say she's not subject to Ibum and she can marry whoever she wants. So in this case, they told her, your husband died and then your son died. And then what happens? Vinises, she got married. Who did she get married to? Zvulun, right? Some unrelated guy. And then they told her, we made a mistake. Not a mistake, unfortunately, they both passed away. We made a mistake about the order, right? And then it turns out that really your son died first and then your husband, which means that what? You are subject to Yibum. So what's the halacha in such a situation? Teitze, she has to leave Zvulun, the husband who she is currently married to, Va'avlad Rishon Va'acharon Mamzer. And both her early, right, both children, right? Remember, this is what we saw before in the Mishnaic symmetry. There's really no Rishon Va'acharon, right over here. It's just to maintain symmetry. Her children from the union with Zvulun are Mamzerim. I will say there's a lot going on. Remember again, we don't pass that. We will come to this. That's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, that you could have Mamzerim from Chayvei Lavin. Okay, but leave that aside. So Rabbi will say, let's analyze this. Hechi Dami. Says Gemara, what's the case? Because remember, what throws us off in the Mishnah? Rabbi will say, when you read these words, it sounds like how many witnesses are showing up to give testimony? How many witnesses? Right. Not right. There are 2 times witnesses are coming. How many witnesses are coming each time to give testimony? Amru is plural, right? It sounds like 2. So let's analyze this. Hechidami, the Gemara says, what's the case? In other words, tell me about the witnesses. Ilema trei utrei. Shabbat say, if you're telling me, so let's analyze this. If you're telling me that 2 witnesses come the first time, so 2 witnesses come say, Rachel, we have terrible news. Your husband and son passed away. Your husband died first, your son died second. Okay? Now she marries Zvulun because she assumes she's not subject to Yibum. And now what happens? Another 2 witnesses come along and say, Rachel, we're so sorry. The order got mixed up. It's really your son died first and then your husband, you're subject to Yibum. So if it's a case of trey, 2 against 2, so the Gemara says, why would we make her leave Zvulun? My chazis the samchis ahani samoch ahani. See, I both say, whenever you have essentially a set of 2 witnesses against a set of 2 witnesses, you kind of come to a testimonial stalemate. In other words, there's nothing to do. So what we do in that situation is we just kind of remain in status quo. So we'll say, if you were to have 2 against 2, what would be the de facto result of that? What would be the result? She remains married to Zvulun, and we don't do anything. We don't do anything. So it can't be 2 versus 2. Furthermore, va'od mamzer safek mamzerhu. Furthermore, in a case of 2 versus 2, how could you call her kid a mamzer? At most, it's what? A safek mamzer. Because you have 2 witnesses against 2 witnesses. V'chi tema lo dak. So maybe you'll say, the Tana of the Mishnah meant safek mamzer. He just wasn't so precise with his wording. Hamidiktani seifa. Harishon mamzer, va'acharon eno mamzer, shma mina dedavka katani. You know, because as we get later on in the Mishnah, where the author of the Mishnah speaks about again, that the first child is a mamzer, the second child is not a mamzer, indicates to us that Allah Chalamaysa, the Tana was very precise with his wording. Shma mina dedavka katani. So if Rabbi say, what we're stuck over here is that I don't understand what the case is. If it's 2 versus 2, it doesn't make any sense, because if it's 2 versus 2, we would allow her to remain married to her current husband, Zvulun. And furthermore, again, halacha l'maisa, you wouldn't call the kids from Zvulun a mamzer, chas v'shalom. At most, you'd call them safek mamzer. Rather, what's the case? Here we go, elalav chad. Oh, here we go. So what do you have to say? The case of the witness who's showing up is a single witness. There's a single witness who's showing up, right? Elalav chad. V'taima da'asu beitrei achashuha halav hachi mehemin. Oh, so we'll say, what's the case? And what's the following situation? An Eid Echad shows up. And what does the Eid Echad say, Rachel? So sorry, your husband and your son passed away. And the order in which they passed away was your husband and then your son. Which means that you are free to remarry and you have no yibum obligation. They both say, then what happened? Then 2 witnesses show up. And 2 witnesses show up and say, the Eid Echad was right, correct, about the death of your son and your husband. What was he wrong about? The order. And in fact, again, it was your son and then your husband who died. So halacha l'maisa, you're subject to yibum. That's when the Mishnah says what? That halacha l'maisa, you have to go ahead and leave Zvulun, and the kid is a mamzer. According to this approach. Then I will say, now what I'll just point out is, according to this approach, what do you see? That an Eid Echad is believed to allow a woman to marry into the general population. Isn't that fascinating? So that's halacha l'maisa, what you do see from this. To which the Gemara says, no. The olam trey. That's not the case. It's not a case of an Eid Echad against 2 Eidim. Rather, it's a case of what? 2 Eidim against 2 Eidim. As we said before, it's 2 Eidim who go ahead and show up and tell her about the original loss, right? And they tell her, but again, in the original loss, they tell her what? That halacha l'maisa, your husband died and then your son died. And then another set of 2 witnesses come along and say that halacha l'maisa, no, we made a mistake. It's your son died and then your husband died. Ayukida amrav achar bar min yumi be'ede hazama. Oh, I will say this is great. A little bit of makas over here. And what are we talking about over here? It's a case of Eidei Hazama. So we'll say, remember again, Eidim Zomamin. Now we'll say, remember again, what's the case, before we get into Rashi, what's the case of Eidim Zomamin? So Eidim Zomamin is 2 witnesses 1 and 2 come along and say, we saw X event. We saw Reuven kill Shimon. So we'll say, then what happens? Another 2 witnesses come along, and what do the second 2 witnesses say? Right? You could not have, the second 2 witnesses, what we call the Mazimin, they aren't coming along and at all arguing about the event. What they argue on, or what they come to say is, witnesses A and B, there's no way you guys saw that. Because at that particular time, imanu hayisem, you were with us. So you could not, there's no way that you witnessed that particular event. Fascinating. See, I will say, watch this. So the Gemara is suggesting like this is so fascinating. So what's happening over here? I will say, remember again, let's go back. The reason we were reluctant to set this up as a case of 2 witnesses against 2 witnesses was why? Because the net effect of 2 against 2 is what? Status quo. In which case, she would not have to leave her current husband, Zvulun. But watch this. Helusai, the Gemara sets it up. So two witnesses come along and say, Rachel, we're so sorry, your husband and your son passed away. And that's the order they passed away, right? Husband and then son. Husband and then son. And therefore, again, you can marry whoever you want. Then two more witnesses come along. And the second two witnesses say, 1 and 2, you guys are lying. I don't know, maybe husband and son are dead, maybe they're not dead. But here's what I know. You could not have seen that event for you were with us. Now, both say, what happens effectively when the first two witnesses become Eidim Zomin? What happens? So now Rachel has no testimony at all about her husband or her son. So if she has no testimony about her husband or her son, then what's her status? Married woman with a child. In which case the Mishnah paskins, she has to leave Zvulun, and any child she had with Zvulun is effectively a mamzer. Look at Rashi, Be'edi Azama, top line of the Gemara. Shachronim hizimu es harishonim. Ultimately, again, the second set of witnesses made the first set of witnesses into Eidim Zomamin va'amru imanu hayisem. And they say to the first set of witnesses, you were with us, you could not be testifying about that event, you didn't see it. Dirachmana hemenu kedichsiv v'dar shashoftim heitiv v'hine eid sheker umukmina lei bi'imanu hayisem v'meseches makus. So I will say, fascinating. Therefore, again, the Gemara says you have no proof about whether or not an Eid Echad has the ability to allow a woman to avoid Yibum and marry into the general marriage pool. This is just fascinating, by the way, because up until now we thought our whole Mishnah was Eid Echad. Here the Gemara is pointing this out, that it's possible that the case of the Mishnah is two witnesses and then Mazimin. Those two witnesses are made into Eidim Zomamin, in which case she is restored back to her established marital state. Incredible. To which the Gemara says, Amalei Rav Mordechai Rav Ashi, Amalei Rav Achal Rav Ashi, Tashma, Ein ha'isha ne'emenes lomar meis yevami, she'enaseh. So we'll say, listen to this. We have a brisa. The brisa says, a woman is not believed to say, my yavam has passed away, so as to allow her to marry someone else. Suppose say, so again, this is a case of where we know husband died, Reuven died. Rachel now falls to Yibum to Shimon. What the Bryce is talking about is Rachel shows up in Beis Din, Shimon died. We're taking a walk, and he fell off a cliff. He was pushed off a cliff, whatever it is, right? Lemaisa, he's dead, right? She shows up in Beis Din, this is what she says. The Bryce says she's not believed. For the Gemara says, furthermore, right? Furthermore, a woman is also not believed to say, Reuven was married to my sister. I was taking a walk with my sister. She fell off the cliff. She's dead. So I will say, right? Now, again, remember, why would the sister let me clarify the case better. Reuven is married to Rachel. Now what happens? Leah shows up in Beis Din, and Leah says, my sister Rachel died. And now, the way the Bryce reads, Lo Mesa Achosi Shechanas Lebesa. What Rachel's intent, right, or Leah's intent, is that now she has the ability to marry Reuven. So the Bryce says, woman is not believed in these kind of cases. Right? So she's not believed to say that her Yavam died. She's not believed to say that her sister died. To which the Gemara says, Hi nihi de lo mehemna. Now, what do you see from this Bryce? It's the woman herself who's not believed in these cases. Ha-eid echad mehemin. But we can infer from this that an Eid Echad would be believed. Remember again, let's keep our eye on the ball. At the end of the day, we're focused on one simple question, which is, we've established that an Eid Echad is believed to say that a woman's husband has died. And that testimony is enough to allow her to remarry. For some reason, the Gemara needs to prove independently, is an Eid Echad believed to say the Yavam died, which would effectively allow the widow to marry into the general population? That's the one question we're hyper-focused on. The Gemara seems to feel that from this brisa, the answer to that must be yes. Because in this brisa, what do we establish? A woman is not believed to go ahead and show up in Beis Din and say, my Yavam died. She's not believed. But bepashtos, what? An Eid Echad would be believed. To which the Gemara says, look at the end of that brisa. Ein ha'ish neman lomar meis achi shiyabe meis ishto. Supposed to listen to this similarly. Safe of that same brisa. A man is not believed to say, my brother died. Right? My brother died when there is in a situation where, let's say, Reuven doesn't have children, right? Then he's married. So Shimon is not believed to say, Reuven died, which therefore sets Shimon up for a situation of Yibum with Rachel. Right? Neither is Reuven believed to say that my wife Rachel died so that he can marry Leah. To which the Gemara says, "Hu niu delo mehemen." So what we just see from here is he himself, right, the husband himself, the man himself is not believed. Ha eid echad mehemen, but an eid echad would be believed. So let's analyze this. Bishlama gabe isha mishum iguna kila barabanan. So I said, here's why it doesn't make sense. I understand why you want to be makel by a woman, but there's no need to be makel by a man. In other words, Rabbi said, the whole yisod of eid echad, of the reason why we believe in eid echad, is only in an aguna situation, only because if we don't believe the eid echad, there are no other witnesses stepping forward. So therefore, you could have a situation where a woman is stuck in a marriage, not knowing what the status of her husband is. But I both say the parallel cases by a man don't make sense. Why don't they make sense? Right? Because a man is not an aguna. Right? Because ultimately, again, a man could marry more than one person. So it's just fascinating. The Gemara says the believability or credibility or license to rely on Eid Echad really only applies to a man and doesn't apply to a woman. To which the Gemara says, Elagabe ish ma'ika lemeimar, Ella ki itzterich, l'Rabbi Akiva itzterich. Rather, says the Gemara, you're right. Right? But when we need to say that in this situation, the Brisa says that the woman is not believed, this comes to teach, this is necessary according to Rabbi Akiva. Why Rabbi say, what does Rabbi Akiva say? So the Gemara says, Sakadai Tchamina, Hov Am Rabbi Akiva, Yesh Mamzer Mechayve Lavin. See, Rabbi say, since Rabbi Akiva himself holds that halacha l'maisa, there's mamzer from Chayve Lavin. Rabbi say, remember again, this is the unique sheet of Rabbi Akiva, which is a double-sided sheet. On one hand, Rabbi Akiva holds, Ein Kiddushin Tovsin B'Chayve Lavin. You can't affect marriage, even with someone who is just prohibited to you by a lav. That's the first part. And then the corollary to that is what? That halacha l'maisa, if you marry someone, or if you have a child with someone who is prohibited by a lav, the offspring is a mamzer. So you might have thought that what? Ema chaysha akil kula dezara v'daika. I might have thought, therefore, Rabbi say, a woman is not going to go ahead and enter into a relationship that is going to mess up her offspring. Right? That's what I would have thought. And therefore, Rabbi say, when a woman shows up in Beis Din and says, my Yavam is dead, I would have thought we could rely on her. Right? Why? Why Rabbi say? Because she has a lot to lose. What does she have to lose? Now, from a status perspective, does she have anything to lose? No. No. Because remember, again, marrying someone other than your Yavam is a love. So from a status perspective, she doesn't have anything to lose. But she messes up her offspring, and her offspring become mamzerim if she's wrong. So I might have thought that in a situation like that, that should vest her with a level of credibility because she's not going to want to do something that would mess up her offspring. Rabbi said this is so profound. Kamash malon de akil kula dida chaysha, akil kula de zara lo chaysha. To which the Gemara says no. She's concerned only with things about herself, but not necessarily with things that concern her offspring. I will say, by the way, such a profound Gemara. See, none of us would ever consciously admit that we would ever do anything to adversely impact our children. Yet I will say, if you think about it, many times we do things that only serve our own purposes and that adversely impact our children. We make lifestyle decisions. We allow things into our homes. We go ahead and we engage in certain behaviors. We do certain things in front of our children. And lemaisa, it negatively impacts them. Now, not often, not malicious. We don't think about it. We don't think about it. But lemaisa, as beautiful as it is to think that a parent would never do anything to actively compromise their child, sometimes it's just pashat not true. And the Gemara says over here, she's concerned, and this is not like a man-woman thing, this is a human being thing. She's concerned at the end of the day with that which will compromise her status, but not necessarily worried about that which will compromise her children. Very profound. And therefore, again, according to Rabbi Akiva, we wouldn't believe her in that case. Now, we're going to discuss separately, Rabbi Osai, halacha l'maisa, what a woman herself is believed, not believed. We'll get to that. That's not our sugi right now. Rava Amar, Rava says, so we'll say, so we still haven't answered our question, right? We've got one simple question, which is an Eid Echad believed to say that the Yavam passed away? That's it. So as to allow the woman to marry into the general pool. Rava Amar, Rava says, Eid Echad Yevama. Okay, Rava says straight out. An Eid Echad is believed by a Yevama. Rava will say, what does that mean? That halacha l'maisa, an Eid Echad is believed to say, right? We know Rachel is married to Ruvain. Ruvain died. Okay, that we know. Now Rachel falls to Yibum to Shimon. Good. So now what happens? Eid Echad shows up and says, Shimon's dead. Is an Eid Echad believed to say that Shimon's dead, which would allow Rachel to marry into the general pool? So Rava says, yes. Eid Echad ne'eman b'Yevama mikava chomer. It's a simple kava chomer. What's the kava chomer? Here we go. Le'isr karei sitarta. Le'isr lav lo kol shekain. By the way, we had this already in yesterday's daf. It just sometimes takes the Gemara a long time to get back, where we have to work through all the possible scenarios. It's a simple kava chomer. If an Eid Echad is allowed, is believed to say that a woman's husband died, and therefore based on that, she is allowed to get remarried. Remember again, if the Eid Echad is wrong, right, then what? What do we call it? Adultery, right? Adultery carries with it kares. So if you're going to believe in Eid Echad when it comes to an Isser kares, certainly you should believe in Eid Echad when it comes to what? A lav. Because remember again, Abosai, marrying someone other than your Yavam at most is a lav. So therefore, Rava says, of course, the Eid Echad is believed. So again, one of the rabbis said to Rava, it's not necessarily a good kavachomer, and I'll tell you why. Look at the case of the woman herself. Based on what we said before, there's something very interesting that comes out, right? That ultimately, again, we're going to see, or at least according to one opinion, based on the price we saw before, a woman is believed to say, my husband died, but she's not necessarily believed to say, my yavam died. Now, again, we don't know why that is yet. If you look at Rashi says over here, right? I'm sorry, it's wrong Rashi, that's on the Eid Echad. So a woman is going to be believed to say that her husband died, but may not be believed to say that her yavam died. So we'll say, why is that? Why is that a woman is not believed to say that her yavam died? Supposed to listen to this, because I was saying Yibum is complicated. Right? Because halacha l'maisa, because at the end of the day, there could be times where everyone say, Yibum is one of those interesting situations where you are thrust into a marital union not of your own choosing. And therefore, Abosai, which again is a pretty, on one hand, if it works, it provides the widow with a sense of immediate security, right? Which could be wonderful. But on the other hand, if she does not like her brother-in-law, or the brother-in-law doesn't like her, it's a terribly awkward situation. So Lamaisa, since there are times that she hates him, lo daiko min sabah. Ultimately, again, she's not going to necessarily do too much due diligence that he's dead and just move on. So what I can make the Rebbe say about Eid Echad also, what could make the same argument that halacha l'maisa, perhaps when the Eid Echad comes along and says that he's dead, she's not going to do the due diligence as well. So Rebbe say, what all roads come back to is the following: Eid Echad by itself is not a valid testimonial unit, right? What does Eid Echad do? Eid Echad makes us just comfortable enough to say that there is some level of validity, and then what do we do next? What's the next step? We shift the onus onto the woman, right? And we say, look, you have everything to lose if this Eid Echad is wrong. You have everything to lose if this Eid Echad is wrong. So now what we're going to do is we're going to give you a license to go ahead and move forward based on this testimony with the understanding that you are going to do the investigation and due diligence. So Rabbi say, what's fascinating is like this. In a case where her husband is dead, or the Eid Echad said her husband is dead, we're convinced that she's going to do the due diligence. Why are we convinced? Because the truth is, if the Eid Echad is wrong, she has everything to lose. Because if she remarries, then what? Let's play this out. If she remarries and the Eid Echad is wrong, then what? Husband shows up, then what? then number one, she's committed adultery. She's committed adultery. Granted, albeit inadvertent adultery, but adultery nevertheless, which is an Isser Kares. Now again, not b'shogeg, but still pretty severe. There's carbonic liability. There could be carbonic liability as well, depending on the circumstance. And what else? If she has kids, mamzerim. Mamzerim. So therefore, I will say, in a case like that where the stakes are so high, we know she's going to do her due diligence. On the flip side of us, what the Gemara is suggesting is like this. When now Eid Echad comes along and says, you're right, we know Rachel was married to Ruvain. Ruvain died. She fell Yibum to Shimon. Now Eid Echad comes along and says, Shimon's dead. Shimon's dead. So I will say, the Gemara says it's just not the same. It's not the same. We're concerned. Why? We're concerned she's not going to do her due diligence. Why is she not going to do her due diligence? Let's go through the factors. Number one, why not? Number one, why not? According to the Gemara, she hates the guy. Now again, that's not always the case, but it's a possibility. And she's relieved that he's dead. I know it sounds terrible, but Lamaisa, not that she's relieved that she's dead. She would have wished him a long life, but she has no want. She doesn't want to be married to him, right? So ultimately, again, there may be a compelling reason over here that she's quote unquote happy he's dead because now she doesn't have to marry him. Number two, what's the worst case scenario? Even if the Eid Echad is wrong, right? Even if the Eid Echad is wrong, so we'll say, and she marries someone else, right? What's the liability on that? A lav. So what? Okay, chatos. Right, good. She'll find a good deal, right, on a sheep, right? It's a chatos, maybe at most. Are the kids mamzerim? So according to Rabbi Akiva, they are. But she listened to Shir, and she knows that we don't pass like Rabbi Akiva, right? He's a das yachid. So therefore, again, kind of her what's the word? Not liability, but her exposure, right? Her exposure on this is very limited. And therefore the Gemara wants to just and that's dangerous. You see, the only way to really rely on Eid Echad is when you have significant exposure. Because in that case, if you have significant exposure, then we're confident that what? You're going to do your due diligence. If there's limited exposure, we're nervous you're going to do no due diligence and you're relying solely on Eid Echad. So I'll say, so interesting enough, the Gemara seems to kind of end off by saying we wouldn't believe in Eid Echad in a case of where he's testifying that the Yavam, Shimon, passed away. I will say, we'll just tell you, the Rambam Paskins in Hilchos Yibum B'Chalitza, in Perek Gimel Halacha Hey, listen to this. He says, Ne'eman Eid Echad laha'ili v'mishemes b'aylam misavemes apiv. The Rambam Paskins, an Eid Echad is believed. Just like an Eid Echad is believed to say that the husband died, an Eid Echad is believed to say that the Yavam died. Essentially, I will say, in all of these cases, we paskin an Eid Echad is believed, because I will say, we assume that even with the lav, a woman recognizes the onus is upon her, and therefore, halacha l'maaseh, she's going to do her due diligence. Also, I will say, the Kal V'chomer itself is a solid Kal V'chomer. If you're going to believe in Eid Echad, at the end of the day, to allow an Isser Kares, you have to believe in Eid Echad to allow an Isser Lav. And therefore, the Rambam Paskins, halacha l'maaseh, an Eid Echad is believed ultimately to say the husband died, and an Eid Echad is also believed to say that the Yavam died. Beautiful. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, Zeh medrash darash Rabbi Elazar ben Masya. Shabbos, remember again, this was the last part of the Mishnah. So the last part of the Mishnah read as follows. This case of where halacha l'maaseh, Amrullah, this was the case of Amrullah Meis Ba'alech bin Iskach V'acha Ba Ba'ila Muteres Lachsrolo Afa Pishnas Lachrong. So this was a case where halacha l'maaseh, Eid Echad showed up, told Rachel your husband died. Rachel said okay. She goes to Shimon, not a Yavam, right? Another guy, and she receives kiddushin from Shimon. So now what happens? Then husband number one comes back. Good. So what do we say? She goes back to husband number one, nothing doing. Rabbi Elazar ben Masya said, even if husband number two, Shimon, gives her a get, that get is a nothing and would not even preclude her in the future from marrying a Kohen. Based on the drasha, we'll say, what was the drasha? The drasha was, V'isha grusha mi'isha. Pasuk said it is only a woman who is divorced from a man, who is ineligible to marry a Kohen. And dafka mi'ish means from a man who she was married to. But if she just had kiddushin with Shimon and there was no valid marriage, then halacha l'maaseh, she's not usher to the kuna. So it says the Gemara. So I will say, I'll just point out. So the Gemara says over here. Fine. So it says, let's go. It says Amrav Yehuda Marav Havelei Rabbi Elazar lemedrash ba marganisa v'darash ba chaspa. Rabbi Elazar could have darshaned such a beauty, such a gem from this pasuk, and instead all he darshaned was a pottery shard. Okay, so my Magnisa, Rabbi say, what could have been the gem that he darshaned from this pasuk? The Sanya v'isha grusha mi'isha. Rabbi say, Torah is speaking about a Kohen. A Kohen is not permitted to marry a woman who is divorced from her husband. Now we'll say, now obviously the pasuk is redundant, right? Why is the pasuk redundant? Because who else is a woman divorced from? Right? In other words, just say v'isha grusha lo yikachu. Why v'isha grusha me'isha? So in our Mishnah, Rabbi Elazar ben Masya darshans it to say that only if she's divorced from a man whom she was fully married to, is she considered to be a divorcee. So in the case of our Mishnah, she was never married to Shimon, and therefore she's not considered to be divorced from Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Elazar ben Masya could have made such a better drasha. What's the better drasha? Watch this. Afil alone iskarsha ela mi'isha psula lekuhuna v'hainu recha get the post. We'll say, watch this. What about a woman who was only divorced from her husband, but permitted to no one else? We'll say, what's the case? Watch this. Let's say a man gives a get to his wife, and he says, this is your get, al minas, on the condition that you are not permitted to any other man. Rashi says, right? We're divorced, but you are not permitted to any other man. So we'll say, what's halacha with such a get? Doesn't work. I will say the whole essence of a get is hariat mutares l'chol adam, right? Marriage and divorce are opposites, right? In marriage, a man has to say hariat mikudeshes li kidas Moshe v'Yisroel, and in divorce, the most important phrase in the get is v'hariat mutares l'chol adam. You are permitted to any other man. So if a man makes a get, gives a get, and he gives with a tanai that you're not permitted to any other man, such a get is invalid. They both say, but as much as it's invalid, it has what's called a reach get, the scent of a get. And I will say that is enough to make her into a gerusha, into a divorcee for kohanic purposes. So even though such a get would be invalid, a Kohen would not be permitted to go out and marry such a woman. I will say, what is that drasha based on? V'isha gerusha me'isha. Even if a woman is only divorced from her own husband, i.e., she has this invalid get, and all the get did was divorce her from her husband, but didn't permit her to anyone else, as much as it is an invalid get, it has the scent of a get, the shemetz of a get, and therefore Allah would preclude her from marrying into the kahuna. So Rabbi Yehuda says to Rabbi Elazar, you could have made such a better drasha, but she went ahead, right? You could have used the drasha you could have made like a gem-like drasha. Instead, okay, you did okay, right? You made a pottery drasha. All right, good. So it says the Mishnah. Another case, Misha halchu ishto lemedina sayam. So we'll say now the reverse case, right? A man is married, so Reuven is married to Rachel. And what happens? Rachel goes on vacation. So Mishalcha ishtola medina sayam, bova amrulo mesa ishtecha. So I'll say this. So what happens? So they go ahead and they tell her, Reuven, I'm so sorry. Reuven, your wife Rachel passed away. Right? Reuven takes it hard, v'nasa esachosa, and he married her sister. Right? He marries Leah. It's important to rebound. Right? So he went ahead and he married Leah. We're going to see how the case actually gets a bit more complicated. V'achar kach basa ishto. You know how you translate this? Right? That's how you translate this, right? Then what happens? Rachel comes back, right? Rachel is back. V'achar kach basa ishto. So we'll say, so now, of course, remember the halachos are different over here. Muteres lachzrolo. So we'll say, ultimately, again, so Rachel is permitted to resume her marriage with Reuven. Look at Rashi, before I turn the page, look at Rashi, that's Rashi in the Daf. Muteres lachzrolo, tekidushe shnia einin klum. Because we'll say, effectively, the marriage of Reuven to Leah is a non-marriage. In other words, remember again, you're not allowed to marry your wife's sister. So halacha says, okay, Reuven thought Rachel was dead, so he married Leah. So we'll say, so remember again, that's permitted. But halacha might say, now that Rachel's not dead, the marriage itself is it's not a marriage. Remember again, effectively, what do we look at? We look at as if Reuven had an extramarital affair with his sister-in-law. They both say, not good, to put it mildly, but Lamaisa, doesn't preclude him from continuing in his marriage with his wife. So when Rachel shows back up over here, they are permitted to resume their marriage. Mutaris lachzor lo amud beis umutar bikrovos shnia ushnia mutaris bikrovav. I will say not only that, but here's what's interesting as well. Halacha l'maisa. Let's say sometime later on, Rachel dies. So ultimately, again, or the truth, it doesn't have to be Rachel dies. Ultimately, so Reuven would be permitted in the relatives of Leah, right? And Leah, ushnia mutaris bekravav, and Leah is permitted in Reuven's relatives. In other words, Rabbi say, the halacha over here is, we do not view them as having had any type of marriage. That's the idea. So therefore, again, the other types of relatives who might be normally prohibited as a result of a marital association are not prohibited in this case. Take a look at Rashi. Umuta b'krovoshnia lisa bita tekaimalan nosin ala nusa bal mafuda. For example, Rabbi say, Reuven could marry Leah's daughter. Right? So remember again. So right, Leah is his sister-in-law. Sister-in-law is asur to him, but ultimately Leah's daughter is not. So we'll say all this is saying over here is that halacha l'maisa, even though it turns out that effectively what they had was an extramarital affair, it does not go at, there is no marital bond between Reuven and Leah. And therefore, again, any of her relatives are permitted to him, any of his relatives are permitted to her. So the Gemara says, similarly, now we'll say, let's fast forward. Let's say now Rachel dies. So we'll say, so right, in case one, part one of the story was Rachel goes away on vacation. Aid comes back and tells Reuven, your wife died. Reuven marries his wife's sister, Leah. Rachel comes back. Okay, mistake. Rachel and Reuven resume their marriage, and Leah's out. So we'll say, now what happens? Later on, Rachel actually dies. She actually dies. In that case, we'll say, then what? Mutar b'shnia. Reuven is permitted to go ahead and marry Leah. Right? He's permitted to marry Leah. So we'll say, so again, just to point out to everyone, what this effectively means is that Allah l'maisa, we understand this, there was no marriage between Reuven and Leah. Good. So the Gemara says, Amrulo meise ishto v'nasa achosa. So we'll say case number two. Same case, Rachel goes on vacation. They say to Reuven, your wife died. As a result, Reuven goes ahead and marries his wife's sister Leah. V'achar kach amrulo kayemes haisa umeisa. And then what happens? But then they tell him, no, we made a mistake. At the time we told you that she was dead, she was alive, but she subsequently died. So in other words, so now, as we stand here now, Lemaisa, she's dead, but we made a mistake in the timeline, which means what? That Reuven, at the time that you married Leah, who you thought was your widow's sister, it was in fact your living wife's sister. But now your wife has passed away. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, so havlat rishon mamzer va'achron in mamzer. So we'll say the earlier child is a mamzer, secondary child is not a mamzer. So we'll say we understand this. What does this mean, earlier or later? So effectively, if they had a child during the time that Rachel was alive, that child is a mamzer. But any children that they had after Rachel passed away would not be mamzerim. Okay, so Rabbi Yossi says, Kosha posel al yedei achirim, posel al yedei atzmo. So the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi says, we'll see what this phrase means. Anyone who makes someone else puzzle, himself is puzzle. V'chosha in posel al yedei achirim, whoever does not make anyone else puzzle, ultimately, again, Eino posel al yedei atzmo, himself doesn't become puzzle as well. Rashi says over here, B'Gemara mefarish la. We'll see in the Gemara exactly what Rabbi Yossi is trying to convey. Beautiful. Says the Gemara, now watch this. Let's make this case a little bit more complicated, Rabbi, because it's not just the pshat that Rachel. So remember again, we've got Reuven married to Rachel, right? And ultimately, again, there's this, right? So now the case that as we saw it was, Rachel went on vacation. Rachel went overseas, right? So now then what happened? Reuven heard that Rachel died, right? We saw that Rachel died, and he married Leah, Rachel's sister. Let's throw another wrinkle on this. Who did Rachel go overseas with? With Leah's husband. So we'll say, so it turns out two sisters are married to two men, right? So there's Rachel and Leah. Rachel's married to Reuven, and Leah's married to Shimon. Rachel went overseas with Shimon. I will say nothing illicit, right? But they went overseas together. So Rachel went with Shimon. Now watch this. I will say, so it turns out that what really happened over here, when the aid or aidim, whatever, we'll see what's happening, come back, what do they testify about? Or I will say, now by the way, they don't have to be testifying about the same thing. In other words, you could have a situation where two aidim are coming, right? So one aid is coming to Ruvain and telling Ruvain what? Rachel died. And another aid is coming to Leah and telling her what? Shimon died. So now we'll say, now what happens? So now Ruvain ends up marrying Leah. So we'll say, so now what ends up happening? So now what's part two of the story? Rachel, right? Can you imagine this? I was saying, Rachel and Shimon walk into Shava Brachas, right? Rachel and Shimon walk in. So Rachel and Shimon are back. So now watch this. V'afagav da'azal ishto v'gislon dinas hayam da'ahani hani nisuim de'kamisra eishes giso agiso afilu hachi eishes giso asira ishto sharia. Now watch this, Rabbi say. Watch this. Now what happens? So now Rachel and Shimon come back to town. They're alive, Baruch Hashem. They're alive. So Rabbi say, now let's play this out. So what did our Mishnah say? Reuven and Rachel could continue their marriage together. That's true on one side of the equation. Rabbi say, who can't continue their marriage together? Right? Leah and Shimon. Why not? Because Leah has effectively, inadvertently committed adultery. And therefore she's asur lebal and to the boel. So Rabbi say, here's what's fascinating. So you might have thought that in the same way that Leah can't continue to live with her husband, that Ruvain and Rachel shouldn't be able to continue to live together as well. Mitoch shenesra eishes giso agiso te'eser ishto. You might have thought, so below Amrinan, and we don't say that since Leah can't go back to Shimon, therefore Rachel can't go back to Ruvain. We don't say that. Halacha Lamaisa, it's two different situations, two different scenarios. And Halacha Lamaisa, as much as Leah and Shimon can't continue to live together, Ruvain and Rachel can. Shlema mas nisin delok Rabbi Akiva. Say that our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. The Rabbi Akiva, supposed to say this is fascinating, because if it's Rabbi Akiva, the truth is, Rachel and Ruvain shouldn't be able to continue to live together. Why not? Get ready for this. Because Havile Achaz Krushaso. Because Rabbi say, listen to this, because Rachel should be considered the sister of the woman who Ruvain divorced. Because according to Rabbi Akiva, essentially Leah is going to receive a get from Ruvain, right? And therefore, again, Rachel, the original wife, should be considered to be like the wife of a woman whom Ruvain divorced, and therefore should be asur. How does that happen? Watch this. Disanyo, in general, I will say, if a man tries to marry an erva, so ultimately, again, the marriage doesn't work, and therefore you don't require a get. With the exception, of course, I will say, of a case of a married woman who gets married based on Bezdin. I will say, what's the case of based on Bezdin? Right? Enei Echad. Rabbi Akiva Mosif Af Eishesach. Rabbi Akiva says the same thing with Eishesach. If you inadvertently marry your brother's sister, because let's say they thought not your brother's sister, your brother's wife, because you thought the brother was dead, or Achos Isha, or the case of your wife's sister. The Chayvun Dam Rabbi Akiva, Baya get, Rabbi Akiva would say, now again, I'll point out to you, by the way, over here, that Rashi says over here, he's not sure why Rabbi Akiva adds these cases. But but watch this. According to Rabbi Akiva, in this case, let's play out this case. In this case, where Rachel is going ahead, right? Rachel went overseas, and halacha l'maisa, now she comes back, right? She goes overseas. Ruvain gets testimony that she's dead. Ruvain marries Leah. Now Rachel comes back. According to Rabbi Akiva holds that Ruvain is going to have to give Leah a get, right? Why? We're not sure, but that's how he holds. So I will say, according to Rabbi Akiva, Rachel really should not be permitted to live with her husband anymore. Why? Because what's Rachel's status? Rachel is the sister of a man whom her husband divorced. And halacha l'maisa, again, you can't marry such a person. The Chayvun Dam Rabbi Akiva Baya get, memele isra alei tahavile achos gerushaso. And since ultimately, again, Reuven has to give a get to Leah. Therefore, Rachel can't remain married to her husband because she is effectively the sister of a woman whom her husband divorced. So we'll have to stop over here for today. We'll pick up at Meretz Hashem. I'm sorry, we have to cover a little bit more ground. Hey, so Meretz Hashem, we'll catch up tomorrow. Meretz Hashem, we'll continue with this case and continue the explanation of Rabbi Akiva. Shkoyach.